All right, so it is now just after 12 o'clock, and we have a good group of attendees here with us this afternoon. So I think we will start. Thank you to all of you who joined us and bearing with us while we have our first live webinar today. My name is Jenna Mills. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement Programs and a proud 2009 and 2016 graduate of Towson University. Thank you for joining us today for our first webinar, 150 Years of TU Traditions with TU Archive Associate Felicity Knox. Before I introduce Felicity, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. Attendees will remain muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the chat function in your window. That should be at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any, we will be monitoring the discussion throughout the session, and Felicity will answer questions at the end of her presentation. I'd now like to introduce Felicity Knox, a 1994 TU graduate. Felicity is the Library Associate and Special Collections in the Special Collections and Archives Department in Towson University's Albert S. Cook Library. Felicity began her career at TU in 2000 and joined the Archives Department in 2009. Felicity assists researchers, works with students, writes articles for the Archives blog, and runs the department's social media platforms. Felicity is an author of the book Towson University, the first 150 years, a photo book celebrating Towson University's founders and rich history in conjunction with the 150th anniversary celebrations of TU. Felicity, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks very much. This is an odd situation for all of us, so hopefully the time we spend together will be interesting and informative, and I hope at least somewhat entertaining. So this is a presentation that I actually gave as part of the 150th celebration for the launch of the book. But things have changed even from that short time ago, just 4 years ago. So I want to highlight with this presentation, not just what has changed for Towson University and all the traditions that we have, but what how they've adapted. We've adapted some of those things given the changes at Towson. And I also want to just make sure that I say that everything that I've gotten as far as what is true about this has come from Towson's resources, so the things that we have in the archives. So if there are things that you remember differently, please let me know, and we will see if we can figure out why that is not what is shown in the archives. So moving on. It feels like every time I do a presentation, I come back to this data. So in order to understand all of the changes and the adaptations that come with these traditions that we're going to talk about, I think we have to think about the mission of the school from its founding until today, and then its enrollment. So as you can see, enrollment really skyrockets when we, after 1963, when we go from being a teacher's training school and a college to a liberal arts school, which is what we are today. So traditions, I'm sure you can imagine, are a lot easier to formulate and keep when the school you're in, the environment you're in, has one mission. And that was, at that point, to train teachers, and the enrollment itself is small. So what happens when you create a larger school with so many diverse choices? How do we create traditions? How do we keep them alive, and how do we keep them inclusive? Or how do we start new ones? And I think it's something that we still struggle with now. So what I've done is I've broken up the traditions that I'm highlighting in this. These are certainly not exhaustive, but these are the highlights. I've broken them up by season, and we're going to start with the start of an academic year, which for us is always fall. And for each season, I'm going to talk about two traditions that we have adapted and one that has disappeared. So in the fall, we now have Family Weekend. But as you can see in the photo on the left, which is from 1938, that's something called Freshman Mothers Weekend. And this began 12 years earlier. It was held over a long weekend. 100 mothers came to the campus to spend the weekend with their daughters. At that point, only women were living on campus. So even though this has been a co-educational school since 1866, since its founding, um, there were women tended to be the people who came to be teachers, and there were not any dormitories on Towson's campus for men until the 1950s. So this would have been a women's majority event. The moms got to see the campus. They got to meet with their daughters' advisors. They got to meet with President Lyda Lee Tall, and they enjoyed entertainment like sports and musical events, and they had dinner. And so by the 1930s, fathers have started to join in. So it doesn't become a thing where you sleep over in your daughter's dorm room anymore. But they definitely come and they see what the campus is like. During World War II, that all kind of falls apart because it's really hard to even get through school, let alone let your parents see what school is like. So it does pick up again in the fall of 1947. But as time goes on, again, it becomes harder to create those kinds of events for, a long weekend. So the program itself gets reduced and reduced. And by within 10 years, by the late 50s, the classes have grown so large that the administration really doesn't seem to know how to do this anymore. So they actually end up abandoning it by 1957, 58. So in the 1980s, it's revived as like this full weekend that's open to all parents and students and families. And students are encouraged to have their siblings come and stay with them in the dorm rooms, and they have like competitive like contests between dormitories, and it becomes sort of more spirited and much more in keeping with what we have today. It's definitely something that many families like. So homecoming actually began when we first moved to Towson in 1915. And it was a very different thing that it is now. So at that point, it really was alumni coming back to campus to share their experiences as teachers in the classroom. So they would come in and they would sort of have this seminar, and they would tell their the young colleagues, like, this is what you can experience if you're in a room schoolhouse, or what it's like in the urban schools. So then after they give their spiels, there would be refreshments, and then they'd have like games, or they'd dance, or they'd see the Glee Club or whatever. And eventually, particularly as more men came on campus, this became more about sports and dances. And the first homecoming queen, Patricia Whiteleather, she was crowned in 1952. So eventually, now we're having parades that show up on campus. They actually would parade on York Road with floats created by classes or organizations or clubs. In 1963, our first mascot, our newly inaugurated Tiger mascot, Mr. Tiger, shows up in the homecoming parade. That's his first time he appears. And so in 1969, the homecoming game, which until that point had been a soccer game, transitioned to a football game. And so that is now sort of what we all know. By the 1980s, the Alumni Association was offering events all weekend long. So by the 1980s, we have found our way as far as what that tradition looks like. And that's, I think, the key is that if we can keep it in the 80s, then it's something we probably keep for a while. So here's what we don't have anymore. So again, thinking back to that enrollment with that really small school, what that small community meant, it was harder I think, not harder, it was just the school was looking for ways that students who were coming into the small community could feel like they were part of the community. So when the school first started, sometime in like the 1870s, they created these two societies called the Normals and the Pestalozzi's, and that is a weird name, and that's a whole other presentation. So we're not going to talk about what that means. It's about education. But so when students started, they were automatically split into one of these two groups. And that was a way for them to feel included in the school. And so at some point, students started this thing called the lighting of the way. And it was this whole ceremony where you were, brought in by the goddess of education, and she made sure you understood the spirit of what being a teacher was. And it was very, you would pass the torch of enlightenment from one class to another. This is very, high level thinking about what it meant to be a teacher. But by the 1940s, students were like, that is really old fashioned and boring. So let's do something more fun. And so the fun thing, unfortunately, kind of became a hazing idea. So, here we have pictures of students going, like they're crawling through a tunnel blindfolded, and they have to complete these missions. And there's all of this stuff that at this point, I think we would not think was okay behavior. It was really designed for those students who were living on campus. And so those who were living off campus felt kind of excluded. Eventually it got a little out of control, and some students were injured. And so the housing director ended up shutting it all down. So now we have winter. And I just wanted to say that the seasonal photos and some of the other sort of the more recent photos are all taken from Kanji Takeno's collections that we have. So in the winter, sometime in the late 1960s, there was it was actually 66. There's a collaboration between Loyola students and Towson students, and they wanted to find a way to raise money for Santa Claus Anonymous. So they came up with this idea of playing football for an entire weekend. So in 1966, they played football for 72 hours. And they raised about $7,000, which if you think in 66 money, that's probably a not insignificant amount of money. I don't really have the figure, but it's pretty awesome. So they ended up sending like mementos from the game to the National Professional Football Hall of Fame in Cleveland. And the Tower Light reported that the Hall of Fame director, Dick McCann, called the marathon a strange and wonderful event and congratulated the players on their energies and efforts on behalf of charity. So unfortunately, over the course of those 72 hours, 24 people went to the hospital, which made the administration leery of letting anyone play the following year, which meant that instead of being held at Towson, it was held in Double Rock Park in Parkville, Maryland. But in 1968, after making everyone buy insurance, Towson hosted again, and it seemed like an epic year. So for this time, they played for 75 hours. There were 13 Maryland colleges, including Morgan, University of Baltimore, Community College of Baltimore, Catonsville Community College, and Johns Hopkins University. And so they all battle it out. The weekend itself was declared Santa Claus Anonymous Football Weekend by then Mayor Thomas T. D'Alessandro. He's the third one, I think. He's Nancy Pelosi's brother. He also threw out the first pass at the Baltimore City Hall, and that pass was like taken. So he throws the pass, and then somebody ran it for 9 miles down York Road to the field at Towson. It was, I'm sure it was actually like a lot of people. So it was estimated that 55,000 people attended these 1968 games, but they didn't raise much money. So there was all these activities that happened around the games. There would be a bull roast, a beer garden, pee-wee football, eating contests, Mr. Bo lookalike contests, kissing booths, beer chugging contests, skydiving exhibitions, and amazingly enough, a lady barber shaving booth and hot pants contest. So Blaze Starr, who's a burlesque dancer, she actually was given the honor of giving the prize, which was like a small keg, I think, of Natty Boh beer. So then the games kind of bounce around for a while. They're hosted at different schools or different parks, like Herring Run Park and then down by Rash Field. But eventually they kind of lost their popularity. And in 1983, the Towson State University student organization behind it actually lost their charter. So what we have now is this Stuff-A-Bus, which this started sometime in the 2000s, I think by the students who were part of the TU Military and Veterans Center. So they began collecting toys for tots, and so they start the Stuff-A-Bus program, and it's something that Towson has really, again, taken, and it's flourished on campus. So while the school that would be TU was established by law in 1864, it wouldn't actually begin classes until January 15th, 1866. And so at some point within the school's history, this day became kind of a day to celebrate Towson, or at that point it was the Maryland State Normal School. And they would do so by, creating speeches that would honor the founders of the school, like the first principal, whose name was McFadden Alexander Newell, M.A. Newell. So it was a day that they would reflect on what the school had become and where it had come from. And so it continues in sort of various ways until the 1960s. And so this picture on the left is actually from the 1966 Centennial Convocation, which was held to celebrate 100 years of the school's existence. So on January 15th, 2016, TU celebrated in Annapolis and was celebrated by legislators there. So that was our 150th anniversary. So I think that when we look at Tiger Day, this is a day that we really do think about how we tell the story of Towson to other people outside of the university. And so Tiger Pride Day happens again usually in the winter, and it's a day when students, faculty, and staff all go to Annapolis to tell legislators about the good work TU is doing and advocate for the needs the school has. And it's a winter tradition that continues and grows the celebrations that were actually started by Founders Day. So what do we lose in the winter? So sometime in the 1920s, there was this thing called the Old English Dinner. Sometimes it was obviously held during December, so sometimes there's a sense that it might be a Christmas dinner, but it's called the Old English Dinner. And so you can see students are all dressed in costume. They would have plays. They'd light the Yule log. Here are some students. They are actually slaying. It's St. George slaying the dragon. That's what's that middle picture. And then they'd all have dinner. And dinner itself was highly ceremonial. Everyone dressed up. You can see this is the dining hall at Newell. Everyone is seated and served by the various staff of the dining hall. The weirdest part of this is in this picture, you can see the staff are sort of processing, and one of the things that they have is a peacock that has been defeathered, cooked, and then put back into its peacock skin, kind of, and then the feathers are sort of, spread out in a decorative fashion, which is just kind of not something we would think of as very celebratory today, but that seemed to be something they thought that people in jolly old England were doing. So when I was a student here, I was lucky enough to be a student of Dr. Florence Newman, and she actually also would have, as part of her Middle English classes, a dinner. So something very akin to this. So we would all dress up, and we would have an old English style dinner. And I was actually lucky enough to participate in one as a student. And then I actually saw her doing this again when I was an employee, when I first started at the archives, and she was still doing it before she retired. So I think that's delightful. Okay, so now we have spring, and that is a welcome sign. Okay. So did you know that Arbor Day used to be a national holiday? Because I really did not. Students, at the time when we were down in Baltimore, we were at this building that was at Carrollton and Lafayette Avenues. So we were right across the street from a park. And so students would celebrate Arbor Day by going and planting trees and other things in Lafayette Park. And then once they came once we moved the campus to Towson, we planted trees and plants in the Glen. And I do often wonder if that's where all the ivy that we have to go and send the goats to eat now because it's invasive, if that's where it came from. Because when I see the records of the things they planted, ivy pops up a lot. So I'm a little worried that we did that to ourselves. Anyway, so this also kind of fell out of fashion sometime during the 1960s. It's that same time when the campus is really growing, and how do we keep up with something that's this not something that everybody would want to do. By that point, students from the elementary school that was on campus, it was the Lyda Lee Tall School or the Campus Elementary School. They were the ones who were really doing a lot of this Arbor Day celebration. So at that point, it starts to fall out of fashion, probably about the time that they move the school from its first home on campus, which was Van Bocklin Hall, to the Lyda Lee Tall School, which no longer stands because we put the College of Liberal Arts there, and it was raised in 2006, I think. Anyway, within the last decade or so, Towson has created this event called the Big Event, and it's like a big spring cleaning event, and it's an all campus-wide volunteer event. People also, they go off campus, and I know that they hang flowers that are, often in baskets along Towson on York Road, but they also can help with households that have registered and said, hey, I need a hand cleaning up for spring. So I think it's a very lovely, again, this adaptation from this Arbor Day where we celebrate by planting to one where we celebrate by helping and cleaning up for spring. So one of the most, this is an interesting thing that I never thought Towson would do, was this May Day celebration. So on the left, you can see people around the maypole and folks gathered around to watch them. So this was something that the campus, they would shut down school, and it would be all the students, and students from that elementary school would come, and they would have plays and dances and celebration of spring. There were vendors. There is this great photo of this man who must have come to campus for years and years. I might have to do a blog post about him if I can ever find out more information. But he shows up first as a vendor selling balloons in May Day, and then down the road, I know he shows up again in like the 1970s yearbook selling balloons at homecoming. So I know that so he would sell balloons. There's all these folks on campus, and they were doing this wonderful spring ritual. And again, we have the May Queen and her court. These are all students and who are elected. I don't know that they're elected. The homecoming queen was elected. I'm not sure if May Queen was voted on or not. And students from the elementary school be part of that celebration as well. Again, this continues through the 1950s, but that campus had grown too big, and so it also falls out of favor at some point. And I like the fact that you could drive down York Road apparently and just see all the students dancing on the maypole. So at some point in the 1980s, Springfest shows up, and that has now become Tigerfest. It's sponsored by the Campus Activities Board, and it's a week full of events, which culminates in a music concert, usually with bands that I don't know. I'm very old, so I don't know who they are, so I can't list them because I don't know that would be impressive or not. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So what have we lost? So senior class activities like crab feasts and visits to amusement parks or Ocean City. There were proms and dinners. At least in the 1970s, there were also visits to burlesque clubs. So again, we get to see Blaze Star shows up again. So I don't know if you've seen The Graduate, the movie, but there is a moment like that in The Graduate. It just makes me think of that. So again, these festivities get harder as the classes grow larger, and especially after more students are studying such diverse things, and coming and going at different times. So it's really, you're not on that 4-year path. Maybe you're on a 6-year path, or you're there part-time, or it's really hard to find a way to celebrate graduating students with this sort of change. So recently we did try a champagne toast for senior students, but that also ended after only a few instances. So outside of commencement itself, it's really difficult to find a way to celebrate graduation, I think. So now that I have talked for a while, I'm interested in hearing if you have any favorite to you traditions, or if there are any that should return, or are there ones that we should begin? And I thank you for your kind attention.
So at this point in time, this concludes Felicity's webinar presentation, 150 Years of Tea Traditions. If you have any questions, please make sure you start using the chat window at the bottom right-hand corner, and just post the questions to all participants. So it looks like we have one question, Felicity. The question is, does anyone on the panel know of a game called Rafter Ball?
Wow, I have never heard of Rafter.
It's played in the Glen.
Huh. I wonder, I've never heard of that. So what sort of, what years were we talking about?
I don't know.
Yeah, I see mentioned in the Tower Light. Huh. I will write it down, and I will see what I can find. Current.
Hey, Jeff, I've actually unmuted you. So if Jeff, you have any comments on this, I've unmuted you. You can actually speak directly to the group if you like.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know if I was unmuted or not. And I didn't mean for this to be such an unusual kind of question, but there's an outdoor stone pavilion in the Glen, the biggest structure in the Glen. Right. And ever since I graduated in 82, and people had been playing it before I got there, so in the 70s. And in fact, we still play it. And we sometimes set up a GoPro, so it's actually even on YouTube if you just did a search for Rafter Ball. But in essence, the center beam inside the structure is like a net in volleyball.
Oh.
And the ball is made of course, it's homemade everything, made up game. It's a brown paper lunch bag filled with styrofoam packing peanuts wrapped with masking tape. And you serve underhanded to go over that beam, over the net. And then the only basic rule, sort of like volleyball, is you can't hit it consecutively, like from one hand to the next, or from you to you. But you can pass it back and forth as many times as you'd like, and then you try to set up your teammate to angle the ball with a hard hit, like a slam that ricochets off the ceiling on the other side and down. But it's so much fun that we played it for 40 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So
I have a question. How did you find out about Rafter Ball?
Well, again, as a student at Towson, I was walking from the Union up to one of the buildings and happened to walk that way and heard a commotion and everybody having a good time. Right. And that was in the era when, this is an aside, but when the drinking age was 18. So on Fridays, they would have a truck, like a beer truck with taps on the side, pull up into the Glen. And they'd have music pumped down there and, people drinking, whatever. And of course, there were more Rafter Ball games then because more people were around.
Yeah. So you said you still play?
We still play. In fact, those YouTube videos that set the GoPro up were pretty current, as little as just a couple months ago.
Definitely going to go and check those out. I'm interested if students have seen you playing and wondered what was happening.
Well, anytime they walk by, we always encourage and say, you could play and watch for a while because it's not very stressful. You just standing there most of the time. And again, it's so much fun. So some of them do join in and pass the torch along to the the next generations.
That's fantastic. That's great. Thank you for sharing that one. I'm going to go look that one up and see what else I can find. That's neat.
Okay, sure. Thanks. I'll mute myself.
Oh, thanks.
All right. It looks like there was a comment to the host that says that we should start doing something to celebrate seniors. And just an interesting note for the Alumni Association and our alumni on the call, we did start a new tradition last spring. It's called Senior Week. So we started a week of activities for our seniors that include things like pictures in front of the Tiger or other famous statues on campus, free of charge. We get professional photographers to come and they bring their cap and gown, or they can wear whatever they like for their photos. We have Cappy Hour, which is a time where they can come and decorate the top of their graduation cap, which is pretty popular now if you've come to commencements. And even a senior social that's about Wednesday or Thursday of that week. And it happens about the week before finals. So we do that. We did that in the spring and also for fall graduations, and we'll continue to do that, as we continue to move forward and we're back on campus with all of our friends. Felicity, it looks like we have another question. It says there's a pool on the right on the senior celebration slide. What is that pool and where?
I don't know. I took it from one of the yearbooks. I think it's in sometime in the 60s. They used to go off and go to Ocean City and other venues. It might just be one of the amusement park areas. I think they were on a picnic somewhere, but I can't tell you offhand where it was because I don't know that they identified it actually in the yearbook itself. Jenna, when you were talking about the students getting their photos taken professionally, so our department looks right over campus. We have literally the best view on campus, I think. So we can look all the way to the west and see, almost all of Towson on the west side. And so we have the the Tiger right in front of the library, and we watch that all the time during graduation ceremonies to see who comes and has their photos taken at the Tiger. And it's always very sweet, and we get sometimes a little too distracted by it. But we did see students having their photos taken professionally there, and we didn't realize that was because of you. So that's a nice thing to know about. So thanks for telling me that.
You're welcome.
So I don't see any other questions or comments.
Okay. So I will just show my face again one more time. And so Felicity, we just really want to thank you for joining us. I hope everyone who came today enjoyed her presentation. You can follow Felicity and the TU Special Collections and University Archives Department on Facebook. Details will be posted in the chat window below to the right of your screen. Make sure you also follow the TU Alumni Association on our social media channels and on Tiger Connect, our alumni community. These details are posted in the chat window and will be shared in a follow-up email. We hope you can join us for another one of our live events and webinars. You can learn more about these events at alumni.towson.edu. Next Tuesday, we will be hosting TU architect Dave Mayhew for a look at TU's campus growth. Thank you, and we hope to see you next time.